Okay, so today, we've been talking a little bit about qualifications for buyers and tenants and how to qualify your clients all the way throughout. One of the things I want to talk about today is that it doesn't just stop from day one or as soon as you qualify them. The qualification process should be an ongoing process for everyone that's involved. And what I mean by that is when you're qualifying a buyer or a tenant, the idea is that you want to understand exactly what they're looking for and so that you can help them the best. At the same time, when you send properties to them that fit the criteria, and if they're not interested, then it's a red flag, not necessarily a huge red flag, but just a red flag for you to investigate further. You should be asking, why is this not fit? Because everything that you told me originally, it fits all those parameters. And so one of the ideas is that when you're talking to them to get that information, they may have changed their criteria, what they're looking for. And that's perfectly fine. But if you aren't aware of it, and if you don't question it, then you won't have a better chance, or rather you would have a better chances if you question it and find out to make the deal happen. So you're always going to want to qualify all the way throughout the whole process with those clients. Additionally, one of the other qualification process that we use, and this is in regards to, let's say, whether it's a buyer or a tenant when you're initially speaking with them, and also throughout the process, you're going to ask them questions. And typically speaking, what you want to do as a sales agent is ask questions that you know the answers to already for the most part, or what the typical answer should be rather, if you ask them. So you're going to pose questions in simple, easy yes or no formats. And the idea is that you're going to kind of imagine a path that you're helping your client walk past. So, and at the end of the path is their goal where they're trying to get to, whether it's a leasing of a building or purchase of a building. So as you're working that path, you're asking these questions, leading them down that path. Whether it's what type of qualifications, what type of properties are you looking for, and then you start going into what are the metrics that you're trying to accomplish, to really try and gauge the motivation of that client. Now, if for some reason, if you ask a question that most people would answer yes to and they say no to, they're taking you off that path. And you have to get them back onto the path. So when I say that you should know the answers to the questions, not only should you know the yes, the yes answer, but also the no answer. What is the no answer? And then how do I get them back on the path? Or is it even possible to get them back on the path? Because if you don't get on the same path with the goal being purchase the property or to lease a property, and they're not on that path with you, they're not along for the ride, you're not going to have that deal happen. So you have to get them back onto that path. So it's asking those questions there to get them back over. So when they say no to something that most people would say yes to, it's a typical red flag that they're not motivated, they're not interested in moving forward, or they're just wasting your time or feeding the information, trying to get the data for what's currently going on in the marketplace, the conditions. And kind of just feeling it out, not really ready right now to pull the trigger. And that's perfectly fine. Clients like that can be good to work with as long as there's an end goal down the road of when they are. And as long as they're being upfront with you. If someone says to me that they're motivated and they have to get into a place within the next, they want to buy a place or they have to buy a place in the next 30, 45, 60 days, and then everything that they do is pushing back, and on all the type of properties that may fit the criteria and they're waiting, then that's showing the motivation's not there. And you want to have those discussions why. Recently I had a client very much like that where we're looking for a property, and initially this was for an exchange property, and it was an STNL investment. We found out their criteria, how much money they had coming out, what they're looking to invest. And we were sending them all these properties, and they were at first responding very quickly. And then they went dark on us for a bit, and we were trying to call them and find out what was going on, what was happening. And when we actually spoke with them, we found out that they changed their criteria a little bit. So all the properties we were sending them wasn't really what they're looking for, and therefore they weren't going to ever purchase any of those. So going back, we're like, well, here's your original investment criteria. Has it changed? And we found out that yes, it has changed a little bit. Now they're looking for something a little bit smaller, price point wise, no debt. They just wanted to purchase it all cash. So we started having to look for those properties. Unfortunately, we only have 2 weeks to find that property because they're in a 1031 exchange. So it's very difficult to do so. All along, we've been asking for feedback, but we hadn't got it. And then finally, when we were able to get a hold of them, they gave us the feedback that their criteria changed. So now we're scrambling, trying to find properties. They're also scrambling because they're concerned because they may have a large capital gains tax charge. So keep in mind with your clients as you're qualifying them out that you want to make sure that what's happening, right, what happened when you originally spoke with them and what they're looking for when you originally spoke with them is what they're continuing to look for, because things change throughout a period of time. You know, what they may have started looking for may not be what they're looking for now. So you really want to really keep in touch, keep that communication going, and qualify them out. Go down that path with them, hand in hand, but always ask the questions, always find out what's going on so that you can actually put them in the property that they are looking for and that's going to be best for them. Okay? So another issue that might come up is especially when you're speaking to a potential seller and really qualifying out a seller. A lot of times a seller will say for certain things, and you really have to have the responses back that make logical sense, that you can get them back on the path to listing the property. Because your ultimate goal is to list the property and sell it, okay? And when I say list the property and sell it, part of that goes with listing the property at the right price. You don't want to overprice the property and list it so high that you have absolutely no interest and therefore you don't sell it. As I used to tell my clients, and I still tell my clients to this day, I'm not in the business of listing properties. I'm in the business of selling properties. So I only take listings that I feel I can sell, okay? And I rely on my analytical skills to determine whether or not it's something that I can sell or not. Now, a lot of times when we're talking to a seller, the first thing they say is, oh, sure, I would entertain an offer, but I don't want to list the property, right? They're not interested in listing it with a agent. To me, that's a red flag. That's not somebody that wants to sell. It doesn't make logical sense. If someone really wanted to sell a property, ultimately speaking, you know, this is basic law of supply and demand when it comes to economics. And everybody's aware of it that, you know, if the demand goes up and the supply remains stable, then prices go up. You know, if supply goes up and demand stays the same, then prices come down. It's supply and demand. So when a seller tells us that they're not interested in listing the property, what they're telling us is that they're not interested in exposing the property out and creating that demand. So it's going to be a lot more difficult to sell because you're only going to be able to look for your own clients and try and pinpoint that one buyer. So to me, when a seller says they're only interested, you know, I'll sell the property, but you can't, I'm not interested in listing it, they're not really a real seller. Okay, they may sell if they get everything in that they're looking for, and you know, but it's a 1 in a million kind of chance. Now, the reason why I say that is when a seller says something along those lines, the logic would dictate that if you list a property, you're going to then be able to expose it to thousands of other agents and thousands more buyers than you would have at your own, within your own database or stable. So that in itself will create demand. And when you create demand, you can get the highest price. So when you're speaking with the seller and they're talking to you and they're saying things like, you know, I'm interested in selling, but I don't want to list it, it's really more of a red flag that they're just trying to look for a buyer that's willing to potentially overpay for that property. Okay. Additionally, when you're speaking with sellers, a lot of times what they'll do is they'll come up and they'll, you know, when you ask them questions, like I said again, you're asking questions that logically everybody would want to say yes to. So you're qualifying them out. So you can ask them, if I could show you an investment that gives you a better return with less risk and less management, is that something that would interest you? And if they say no, you know right away that they're just not interested. Okay. And because almost everybody's going to be interested in a safer investment that returns more money. Okay. So when they start saying things like this, you know that they're not a true seller, or they're not really looking to sell. They're probably just they're more of a predatory seller looking to get the highest price on somebody that might be a sucker, so to speak, that would pay that price that they're looking for. Not one that is going to go put it on the open market and sell it. Because ultimately, if the seller wants to sell the property, then exposure, marketing, the right price is what's going to get it sold. So always qualify your clients as you move forward with them, and continually qualify them. But when the part of the qualification process that we talked about before, the desire, ability, means, motivation, motivation is always the hardest part to determine. So during the entire process, you should be trying to figure out that motivation, where it is, if it's changed from when you originally spoke to them. Okay. Always take a look at that. Always qualify, keep qualifying until you're at the point where you finally make the transaction and the deal happen. This way you can be as efficient as possible. Don't spend too much time on clients that are not necessarily going to ever do a deal, and you'll end up doing more deals. All right? Any questions? No?
I do.
Okay.
Sometimes clients have other ventures and they'll spend the money while we're doing the process.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say keep qualifying them, what if we get to a point that they did use some of the funds that were already in there?
Okay.
That worries.
So essentially what you're asking is, like, let's say you have a client, whether it's a tenant that might have money for TIs or whatever else, they have other business ventures, they're working with it, or even on the investment side, and they've used some of the capital that they had planned to use for this property. Now what do you do? Well, ultimately there's two things. One is you have to potentially change. One is to see if they have other resources for the capital to get into it. This may be debt. There are different lenders that can give tenant improvement loans. There are different lenders that will give a higher loan to value potentially for a property that they're looking to get. If it's an SBA financing, there's other, different types of financing that we can roll into it with the improvements as well. So look at the debt. Is there any kind of debt that might make sense for this deal to happen? And if not, then they have to look for other sources of capital. Okay. So to come in, and finally, if for some reason they don't have resources to get additional debt or capital, then you're going to have to change the criteria and just go down a little bit and, adjust to what they can afford now.